Hey community, it's Pastor Brett with today's daily Bible reading. As always, we encourage you to opt in at our website, findcommunity.com/Bible reading, to have these passages and these videos delivered into your inbox each morning. We're reading today from Hebrews chapter 11. And in this passage, it is famous for its take of faith. The beginning of the chapter says this: faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see. And we want to unpack that in our reading today and what that means. And that sort of approach to faith can mean in our lives today. So let's read together Hebrews 11, verses 8 through 16. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. He was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he was as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sands on the seashore. All of these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he prepared a city for them. Now, I want to point out two aspects of faith that I think are very easy for us to overlook. You know, when we think about faith, and often that is the kind of sayings that they might put on a coffee mug that are kind of cheery and hopeful. But the first thing I need to point out here is that faith here was often unrewarded in this world. Right? What does it say here? Abraham, he lived as a foreigner in this land that would eventually be the inheritance for his people. Right? He did not get to experience it as later generations would. He did not get to experience it as his home or as a promised land. He lived there in tents as a stranger in a foreign country. He didn't get to see it in its glory. And yet by faith, he left his homeland. He left where God called him to go, not knowing where he would end up and not knowing not seeing the ultimate expression of God's provision for them in that place. And it goes on. It says in verse 13 that all of these that are listed in this chapter, this hall of fame of faith, many of them did not see. Verse 14, they did not receive the things promised. They saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were strangers and foreigners in this land. Sometimes, the first thing I want us to grab onto is sometimes faith means understanding that we may not see the fulfillment of that hope here on earth. All right, or in our lifetime. We go back to our definition in verse 1. Faith is confidence in what we hope for, assurance of what we do not see. I think sometimes our vision of faith is that, well, we may not see it right now, but in a week, God will show up and give us what we're waiting for, or in a month, or in a year. And the promise of faith is not quite that. The promise of faith is that knowing through the story of generations and the legacy we're leading in faith, God will do what he has promised. He will accomplish what he set out to do, but our promise in that is not that we will see all that come to fruition with our own eyes. It may be a little humbling. It may be a little bit difficult for us as a culture of instant gratification and immediate results to wait like that. But that's exactly what faith calls us to do, because faith ultimately is calling us to a trust beyond our own senses, beyond our own eyes, sometimes even beyond our own experience. I think it's a hard ask for us, but I think it is a good thing to practice, a good thing for our souls when we begin to understand that our faith calls us beyond results, beyond the results that we can see here and now. It's trusting the God whose hand is shaping history and bending history towards his redemptive purposes beyond just one generation, beyond just my lived experience, but throughout the world and throughout history. The second thing that I want to point out in this text I think is important for us is that because they had this perspective of faith, again and again it says of Abraham and Sarah and all the people listed in this chapter that they lived as foreigners and strangers on earth. Ultimately, because their faith was anchored not in their own experience, but in the faithfulness and the trustworthiness, the character of God, they realized that this was not their home. That kind of view of faith forces us to realize that we can't put our hope in things of this world, that ultimately we are going to be strangers and foreigners in this place because we don't live by the same metrics. We don't measure the same things. I think it is tempting around us, whether we think about the comforts of society, whether we think about the benefits of retirement, whether we think about maybe the temptations of political power and political systems. It is really easy to feel at home in this world. But faith, by its very definition here in Hebrews 11, calls us out of that understanding to say, no, because your faith is for things that you might not experience in this world, it reminds you that you're longing for what the author called here the heavenly city. You're clinging to your citizenship in heaven. You're longing for that which will come, not that which is present. And man, that is again a challenge for us, maybe a rebuke to us, but that is ultimately good news. Because anything in this earth, it is fickle. Our retirement is subject to the economic ups and downs. Our earnings are subject to the laws of supply and demand. Our savings can be eaten away by moths and inflation. Our political systems ebb and they flow through generations. Even the things that we look at in this world and we think, oh, it doesn't change. No, it changes. The one thing that does not change is God's character. So that, his faithfulness, his actions, his character, that is where we anchor our faith. That is where we find hope. And ultimately, the promise of this passage is where we will find our home. So I want to ask you today, could we live differently because our home is not here? Our hope is not our retirement package or our savings or our 401k. Those things are found in God and God alone. May you find your home in him. May you find your hope in him today, community. All right, God bless. I can't wait to see you guys this weekend.